you think they would choose to stay in a relationship that is characterized by bullying, fear, and panic?
With all respect, Congresswoman, I do not accept the premise of your question. That is not how we operate the business.
Okay. All right.
And in fact, we work very hard to provide fantastic tools for sellers, and that's why they've been successful.
Thank you for that. Mr. Bezos, I'm going to close with giving the bookseller the opportunity to finally be heard by you.
Mr. Bezos, we increased our sales on Amazon by 5 times in the past 3 years. And we have contributed that much of proportional seller fees to Amazon. We have contributed that much to your business to 5 times. We followed all the rules that were set by you. We please, just help us in earning a livelihood. We beg you. There are 14 lives at stake. Please, please, please help us get back on track.
With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentlelady. We've now concluded our first round. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Bezos, according to your testimony, the marketplace is competitive, but Amazon controls as much as 75% of all online marketplace sales. An eMarketer, a source you cited to us in submissions to this committee, reports that Amazon has nearly 7 times the market share of its closest competitor. Isn't it true that small businesses have no real option but to rely on Amazon to connect with customers and make online sales?
No, sir. With great respect, I do have a different opinion on that. I believe there are a lot of options for small sellers. I believe Amazon is a great one, and we've worked very hard. I think we are the best one.
Well,
we
Mr.
have
Bezos,
a lot of different programs that help sellers, but we are not the only option.
There are 2.2 million active sellers as of yesterday. About 37% of those sellers rely on Amazon as their sole source of income. That is over 800,000 people relying on Amazon to feed their families, put their kids through school, and keep a roof over their heads. Mr. Bezos, you have referred to third-party sellers as both your partners and customers. But isn't it true that Amazon refers to third-party sellers as internal competitors?
I think I wouldn't surprise me. In some ways, we are competing, and they're also competing with each other.
Well, that's right. Your own documents, Mr. Bezos, Amazon's own documents that you produce refer to the very same sellers that you've described as Amazon partners as internal competitors. In fact, we've heard from third-party sellers again and again during the course of the investigation that Amazon is the only game in town. One small business owner we interviewed described it this way, and I quote, "We're stuck. We don't have a choice but to sell through Amazon." Another said, and I quote, "They've never been a great partner, but you have to work with them." During this investigation, we have heard so many heartbreaking stories of small businesses who sunk significant time and resources into building a business and selling on Amazon, only to have Amazon poach their best-selling items and drive them out of business. So I want to talk to you about one company that really stood out from the rest. I want you to pay close attention to how they described your partnership, Mr. Bezos. We heard from a small apparel company that makes and sells what they call useful apparel for people who work on their feet and with their hands, like construction workers and firefighters. This particular business discovered and started selling a unique item that had never been a top seller for the brand. They were making about $60,000 a year on just this one item. One day they woke up and found that Amazon had started listing the exact same product, causing their sales to go to zero overnight. Amazon had undercut their price, setting it below what the manufacturer would generally allow it to be sold, so that even if they wanted to, they couldn't match the price. Here's how the apparel company described working with Amazon, and I quote, "Amazon strings you along for a while because it feels so good to get that paycheck every week. And in the past, for lack of a better term, we called it Amazon heroin because you just kept going and you had to get your next fix, your next check. But at the end of the day, you find out that this person who was seemingly benefiting you, making you feel good, was just ultimately going to be your downfall," end quote. So, Mr. Bezos, this is one of your partners. Why on earth would they compare your company to a drug dealer?
Sir, I have great respect for you in this committee, but I completely disagree with that characterization. What we have done is create in the store a place. If you go back in time, we sold only our own inventory. It was a very controversial decision inside the company to invite third-party sellers to come into what is really our most valuable retail real estate, our product detail pages. We did that because we were convinced that it would be better for the consumer. It would be better for the
Mr.
customer
Bezos,
to have all of that selection. And I think we were right,
Yeah.
and I think it's worked out well.
Reclaiming my time. Unfortunately, this is one of reclaiming
my
my time, Mr. Bezos. This is one of many small companies that have told us during this year-long investigation that they were mistreated, abused, and tossed aside by Amazon. Now, Mr. Bezos, you say that Amazon is only focused on doing what's best for the customer. You just said it again, and that also third-party sellers. But how is that possible when you compete directly with third-party sellers with your own products that undercut the competition? Isn't it an inherent conflict of interest for Amazon to produce and sell products on its platform that compete directly with third-party sellers, particularly when you, Amazon, sets the rules of the game?
Thank you. No, I don't believe it is. We have the consumer is the one ultimately making the decisions. They're making the decisions about what to buy, what price to buy it at, who to buy it from. And
That's not the question, Mr. Bezos. The question is there an inherent conflict of interest because you are a data company? You know when customers put something in their cart, when they take it out. Traditional brick and mortar stores like a grocery store where competition occurs don't have that. And so I just want to follow up finally on an answer to the question that you gave to Congressman Jayapal. You said that you can't guarantee that the policy of not sharing third-party sellers' data with Amazon's online hasn't been violated. You couldn't be certain. Can you please explain that to me? Can you list examples of where that policy has been violated? Because it's particularly concerning to me, Mr. Bezos, that shouldn't third parties know for sure that data isn't being shared with your own line, their competitors? Why should a third party seller list their product on Amazon if they're just going to be undercut by Amazon own product as a result of data you take from them?
Sir, I think what I want you to understand, and I think is important to understand, is that we have a policy against using individual seller data to compete with our private label products.
You couldn't assure Ms. Jayapal that policy isn't violated routinely.
Well, we are investigating that, and I do not want to sit here, and I do not want to go beyond what I know right now. But we are, as a result of that Wall Street Journal article, we are looking at that very carefully,
Thank you,
and
Mr.
we want to
Bezos.
get those facts. And I will surely share them with you.
Thank you, and we look forward to that. The evidence we've collected shows that Amazon is only interested in exploiting its monopoly power over the e-commerce marketplace to further expand and protect this power. This investigation makes clear that Amazon's dual role as a platform operator and competing seller on that platform is fundamentally anti-competitive, and Congress must take action. And with that, I recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I think that the history proves that Congress does a poor job in picking winners and losers. And I've looked over a lot of the material that has been assembled. I've been working with the chairman for over a year on this bipartisan investigation. And I have reached the conclusion that we do not need to change our antitrust laws. They have been working just fine. The question here is the question of enforcement of those antitrust laws. Now, we've heard a lot about the Facebook acquisition of Instagram. That happened in 2012. Obama FTC signed off on that. So regardless of what you think has happened at that time, the fact is that this acquisition did pass the smell test of the regulators involved. Now, maybe they made a mistake or maybe something else happened, I don't know. But the fact is that there is not a problem with the law. Now, back about 35 years ago, AT&T was broken up because it was determined that one-stop shops were monopolistic. And AT&T, because you had to get your long-distance service from your local phone company, that was monopolistic. So the baby bells were spun off. A whole lot has happened since then. There were mergers and acquisitions in the telecom industry. Technology advanced a huge amount. And guess what? We're back to exactly where we were in 1984. So this goes to show that congressional pressure is not the best. Now, using the AT&T example, which I think was a big flop and counterproductive, let me ask Mr. Bezos, say the AT&T example was applied to Amazon, and you were required to spin stuff off. So you might have no more of a one-stop shop, but you have to go to separate places for books or groceries or videos or electronics. How are the consumers helped by that?
Sir, thank you. They would not be.
Right.
Very clear.
Now, Mr. Pichai, let me ask about Google. If you were forced to split up your business lines, say spin off ad tech and YouTube, can you describe what happens to consumers there?
Congressman, today, consumers in most of the areas we are dealing with, they see prices free or falling, and they get more choice than ever before. So I think it serves them well.
And you're right there. So, I'm not going to be on this committee in the next Congress. I am going to put my feet up and become a senior, quote unquote, statesman. But, let me say that we have heard a whole lot of complaints about big tech. Some of them are political in nature, and I share the complaints and the concern of Mr. Jordan and others. And others talk about allegedly anti-competitive activity. It seems to me that it's not for Congress that legislates, but it's something where we ought to go back to the regulators, to the enforcers, have them look at this stuff and have them make a determination. But there are some matters of concern that we have heard from both sides of the aisle that I think need to be addressed. And if it requires an agency like the FTC to say that they've made mistakes in the past, so be it. We're all human, we all make mistakes, and even government agencies do that. I yield back.
Zuckerberg, in March of 2012, you suggested, Sheryl Sandberg responded that, quote, "It is better to do more and move faster, especially if that means you don't have competitors build products that take some of our users." Facebook's product management director added that, quote, "I would love to be far more aggressive and nimble in copying competitors." Has Facebook ever taken steps to prevent competitors from getting footholds by copying competitors?
Congresswoman, I view it as our job to understand what people are finding valuable in all of the services that they use. And certainly if someone... Do you copy
your competitors?
Congresswoman, we've certainly adapted features that others have led in, as have others copied and adapted features that...
I'm not concerned about others. I'm just asking you, Mr. Zuckerberg, since March of 2012, after that email conversation, how many competitors did Facebook end up copying?
Congresswoman, I don't know.
Less than 50? Any estimates? Your team was making a plan. How did it play out?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure I agree with the premise here. Our job is to make sure that we build the best services for people to connect with all the people they care about. And a lot of that is done by innovating and by building new things that are leading the way internally.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. Let me go on. Has Facebook ever threatened to clone the
Congresswoman, not that I recall.
And I'd like to just remind you that you are under oath, and there are quotes from Facebook's own documents. Prior to acquiring Instagram, Facebook began developing a similar product called Facebook Camera, correct?
Congresswoman, that's correct. I've said multiple times that we were competing in the space of building mobile cameras with Instagram. That's what they did at the time. Their competitive set was companies like what we were building with Facebook Camera and ViscoCam and PicPlease.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. Did you ever use this very similar Facebook Camera product to threaten Instagram's founder, Kevin Systrom?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure what you would mean by threaten. I think it was public that we were building a camera app at the time. That was a well-documented thing.
Let me tell you that in a chat, you told Mr. Systrom that Facebook was, quote, developing our own photo strategy, so how we engage now will also determine how much we're partners versus competitors, that you would go into, quote, destroy mode if he didn't sell Instagram to you. So let's just recap. Facebook cloned a popular product, approached the company you identified as a competitive threat, and told them that if they didn't let you buy them up, there would be consequences. Were there any other companies that you used the same?
That we were going to compete in one way or another. I don't view those conversations as a threat in any way.
I'm just using the documents and the testimony that the committee has collected from others. Did you warn Evan Spiegel, the founder of Snapchat, that Facebook was in the process of cloning the features of his company while also attempting to buy Snapchat?
Congresswoman, I don't remember those specific conversations, but that was also an area where it was very clear that we were going to build the best products in all of the spaces that we can around helping people stay connected with the people they care about.
I appreciate that, Mr. Zuckerberg. I think the question, a case study, in my opinion, in monopoly power competitors and to copy, acquire, and kill rivals. You've used Facebook's power to threaten smaller competitors and to ensure that you always get your way. These tactics reinforce Facebook's dominance, which you then use in increasingly destructive ways. So Facebook's very model makes it impossible for new companies to flourish separately, and that harms our democracy, it harms mom-and-pop businesses, and it harms consumers. Mr. Chairman, I...
For being here today. I'm concerned that you've used Amazon's dominant market position to unfairly harm competition. We've heard from a number of companies that Amazon uses proprietary data from third-party companies to launch its own private label products, meets with startups to discuss investing in the product, and then uses the proprietary data from these meetings to create its own private label products. PopSocket's CEO and inventor David Barnett detailed how Amazon allowed counterfeit products to appear on Amazon's marketplace ahead of Amazon allegedly failed to remedy until PopSockets agreed to a nearly $2 million marketing deal with Amazon. We've also seen troubling. Wall Street Journal also reported last week that Amazon's venture capital fund used meetings with unsuspecting startup companies to gain access to secret proprietary product information and financial details. Amazon then reportedly used that information to launch competing. There are many examples of this behavior, but one allegation in the journal's reporting sticks out in particular. In 2011, Amazon contacted Vocalife, LLC's inventor, about the possibility of investing in the speech detection technology. Vocalife's founder accepted the meeting, thinking this was the company's big break. After an abrupt halt, Amazon's allegations are serious, unknowingly furthering China's use of forced and slave labor conditions on the Amazon marketplace, including Nike, Starbucks, and Samsung, have ties to Chinese factories that use enslaved Uyghur Muslims. Following these concerning reports, Senator Hawley introduced an important bill last week requiring American businesses to certify that their supply chain does not rely on forced labor. I will be introducing the House companion bill later this afternoon. While I do not expect you to have intimate knowledge of the legislation, I do want to ask all four of our witnesses a simple yes or no to your products, or allow products to be sold on your platform that are manufactured using slave labor. Mr. Cook, you were kind enough to visit with me on the phone. I think we briefly discussed this issue. If you can give a yes or no answer, and I understand you haven't read the details of the bill, but would you agree to this idea?
I would love to engage on the legislation with you, Congressman, but let me be clear, forced labor is abhorrent. And we would not tolerate it in Apple. And so I would love to get with your office and engage on the legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Pichai.
Congressman, I'll share your concern in this area. I find it abhorrent as well. Happy to engage with your office and discuss this further.
So I really don't want to even engage with my office half the time. Will you guys agree that slave labor is not something that you will tolerate in manufacturing your products or in products that are sold on your platforms?
I agree, Congressman.
And Mr. Cook?
We wouldn't tolerate it. We would terminate a supplier relationship if it were found.
Mr. Zuckerberg?
I agree. We wouldn't tolerate this, and if we found anything like this, we would also terminate any relationship.
And Mr. Bezos?
Yes, I agree completely.
Great. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I now recognize the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Mr. Buck for that excellent line of questioning and for the upcoming legislation. I look forward to joining that. We want, in the 19th century, we had the robber barons. In the 21st century, we got the cyber barons. And we want to make sure that the extraordinary power and wealth that you've been able to amass is not used against the interests of democracy and human rights around the world, and not against the interests of a free market at home. So, Mr. Bezos, let me turn to you. I'm interested in the role that you play as a gatekeeper. A lot of consumers want to know when the HBO Max app will be available on your Fire device, and I understand that negotiations are ongoing, but that your company is not only asking for financial terms, but also for content from Warner Media. Is that right, and is that a fair way to proceed? In other words, is it fair to use your gatekeeper status role in the streaming device market to promote your position as a competitor in the video streaming market with respect to content?
I'm not familiar with the details of those negotiations. As you said, they're underway right now. I predict that the companies will eventually come to an agreement. And I think this is kind of two large companies negotiating agreement. It's kind of normal case of normal commerce.
But here's why I pursue it, precisely because it is a large company. And in a way, they stand in for hundreds of thousands of much smaller companies who are even in a more disadvantageous position with respect to negotiating with you. I guess the general proposition then you can speak to if you don't know the details of this, which is it okay to negotiate not just for financial terms in having someone be part of your Fire unit, but also to try to extract in that negotiation leverage with respect to getting content from them?
Well, again, I'm not familiar with the details. What I would say
I'm not asking about that one in general. In general,
I think that when two companies are negotiating, you are negotiating not just the amount of money that's going to change hands, but also what you're going to get in exchange for the amount of money. That is a very fundamental way that business works.
Do you see at least to outsiders that would look like a structural conflict of interest, like you're using your control over access to people's living rooms, essentially, you're using that in order to obtain leverage in terms of getting creative content that you want. And are you essentially converting power in one domain into power in another domain where it doesn't belong?
I think what I should do is offer to get you information. I'll get it to your office for you, because I'm not familiar enough with this, and I could imagine that there would be scenarios, if we're just talking in the abstract, where it would be inappropriate, and I could imagine scenarios where it would be very normal business and very appropriate.
Fair enough. I want to talk about an emerging market, smart homes, and I want to start with the hub of the smart home, smart speakers. Does Amazon price the Echo device below cost?
Not its list price, but it's often on promotion, and sometimes when it's on promotion, it may be below cost. Yes.
Well, several other companies did tell us, in fact, that Amazon is pricing Echo devices way below cost, making it nearly impossible for them to compete, and aggressively discounting Alexa-enabled speakers as a strategy to own the smart home. Like many markets we've heard about today, smart speakers with voice assistants like Alexa, along with the myriad of smart home appliances that Alexa can interact with, make up the next ecosystem or platform for tech companies to lock in customers. Would you say the smart home market for which the Echo Ring security system and other smart devices operate is a winners take all market? Yes or no?
No, I wouldn't, especially if we're able to succeed at what we want, which is we would like our vision for this is that smart home speakers should answer to different wake words. So,
when considering the acquisition of
on a case by case basis, and I think in that, just to, because I think it's important, if we could achieve that, then I think you would get really good behavior on the part of competitive voice agents helping you.
When you were looking at acquiring Ring, you wrote to your executive team, quote, "We're buying market position, not technology, and that market position and momentum is very valuable." So if smart homes are not a market with lock-in effects, why would a leading market position and momentum be so very valuable?
Sir, market position is valuable in almost any business, and it's one of the primary things that one would look at in an acquisition. There are multiple reasons that we might buy a company. Sometimes we're trying to buy some technology or some IP. Sometimes it's a talent acquisition. But the most common case is market position, that the company has traction with customers, they've built a service, maybe they were the first mover. There could be any number of reasons why they have that market position, but that's a very common reason to acquire a company.
Well, once a company becomes dominant in a market, it can favor its own products and services. Alexa-enabled smart speakers make up over 60% of the smart speaker market. Mr. Bezos, when I ask Alexa to play my favorite song, Prime Music is the default music player, is that right?
I think that's true if you're a Prime member, yes.
And a New York Times report found that when users say, "Alexa, buy batteries," Alexa responds, "Would you like to buy AA Amazon basic batteries?" So has Alexa ever been trained to favor Amazon products when users shop by voice?
The time of the gentleman has expired, but the witness may answer the question.
I don't know if it's been trained in that way. I'm sure there are cases where we do promote our own products. Is of course a common practice in business, and so it wouldn't surprise me if Alexa sometimes does promote our own products.
Thank you, and I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Pichai, during our prior discussion earlier today, you said that Google doesn't work with the Chinese military. That answer was deceptive, because Google works with many of the entities that work with the Chinese military in common collaboration. And just as one example would be Tsinghua University, where Jeff Dean, who is the head of Google AI, served on the Computer Science Advisory Committee for the university, and then the university takes nearly $15 million from China's Central Military Commission. So you can see how even if you don't literally show up at the offices of the Chinese military, if you're all showing up at the same place, working together on AI, that would lead to my concern. But I want to talk about search, because that's an area where I know Google has real market dominance. On December 11th, you testified to the Judiciary Committee, and in response to a question from my colleague Zoe Lofgren about search, you said, "We don't manually intervene on any particular search result." But leaked memos obtained by the Daily Caller show that that isn't true. In fact, those memos were altered December 3rd, just a week before your testimony, and they describe a deceptive news blacklist and a process for developing that blacklist approved by Ben Gomes, who leads search with your company, and also something called a fringe ranking, which seems to beg the question, who gets to decide what's fringe? And in your answer, you said to Ms. Lofgren that there is no manual intervention of search. That was your testimony, and now I'm going to cite specifically from this memo from the Daily Caller. It says that the Daily Caller obtained from your company. It says the beginning of the workflow starts when a website is placed on a watch list. It continues, this watch list is maintained and stored by Eris with access restricted to policy and enforcement specialists. Sort of does beg the question who these enforcement specialists are. Access to the listing can also be shared on a need-to-know basis to enforce or enrich the policy violations. The investigation of the watch list is done in the tool Athena, the Ares manual review tool. So you said to Congresswoman Lofgren that there was no manual review tool, and then your documents indicate that there is a manual review tool. So help us understand the inconsistency.
Congressman, there are two parts to this. In general, we algorithmically approach our search results. We have robust policies to do so, and we test it both with user feedback and we use raters to validate. Last year alone, we ran over 300,000 experiments and launched around 3,000 improvements to search. And we don't manually tuned. The question last time was in the context of, is there someone behind the curtain, manually tuning an individual search result? We don't. We generally approach it algorithmically. We, however, in order to comply with the law in every country we operate in, for example, there may be an actor or a website identified as interfering in elections, and we then have to put that site on a list so that that doesn't appear in our search results against queries. So other examples would be violent extremism.
And is that done manually, Mr. Pichai? That process you described, is that done manually?
And we could get reports from law enforcement agencies. We are complying with, or it's a known DMCA-based.
There is either a manual component or there is not a manual component. Which is it?
For creating those lists, that process can involve manual portions.
Okay, great. Well, that is sort of the concern that I have. You've now said something different today than you said to Ms. Lofgren, because you've confessed that there is a manual component to the way in which you blacklist content. And it seems to be no coincidence that it's sites like Gateway Pundit, The Western Journal, American Spectator, Daily Caller, and Breitbart that receive the ire or the negative treatment as a consequence of your manual tooling. And it also seems noteworthy that whistleblowers at your own company have spoken out. You said that one of the reasons you maintain this manual tool is to stop election interference. I believe it is, in fact, your company that is engaging in election interference. And it's not just my view. Mike Wacker came out and was a whistleblower indicating that the manual blacklist targets that Google specifically goes after are those who support President Trump, who hold a conservative viewpoint, and he left your company in 2019 because he was speaking out against these outrage mobs. So can you see how when you empower individuals, some of the same individuals that Project Veritas has exposed as labeling people as terrorists who say make America great again or who support the president, that in fact can be the very election interference that we're concerned about, and that you're using your market dominance in search to accomplish that election interference?
Congressman, with respect, I strongly disagree with that characterization. We don't approach this work with any political viewpoint. We do that to comply with law, known copyright violations, very in narrow circumstances, and we have to do that to comply with the law. And in many cases, those requests can come from law enforcement agencies.
Your own employees are saying you're doing it for a different reason. Your own employees are saying it's political bias. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr.
And I'm sorry, may I be recognized for unanimous consent request?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, just given the productivity of our discussion, I'd request that we be permitted a third round of questioning.
Without objection. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Nadler.
Yeah. The documents prove that the news and journalism industry in this country are an economic freefall. Over 200 counties in America no longer have a local newspaper, and tens of thousands of journalists have been laid off in recent years. The reason journalism is in freefall is that Google and Facebook now capture the vast majority of digital ad revenue. Although news publishers produce valuable content, it is Google and Facebook that increasingly profit off their content. Publishers have told us that Google and Facebook maintain their dominance in these markets in part through anti-competitive conduct, as well as conflict of interest. Mr. Zuckerberg, in 2015, Facebook reported high and quickly growing rates of video viewership on its platform. Based on these metrics, news publishers fired hundreds of journalists, choosing instead to boost their video divisions. In 2018, it was discovered that Facebook had inflated these metrics and had known about the inaccuracies several years before Facebook publicly disclosed this. Mr. Zuckerberg, did you know that these metrics were inflated before they were publicly released?
Congressman, no, I did not. And we regret that mistake and have put in place a number of other measures since then to make sure that do you realize the harm that this caused journalists across the country? Congressman, I certainly know how important it is that the metrics that we report are accurate, and we've put in place additional measures to make sure that we can audit those. And what do you have to say to the journalists
who lost their jobs because of Facebook's deception.
Well, Congressman, I disagree with that characterization and also your description of what...
Reclaiming my time, Google, meanwhile, maintains its dominance in part through aggregating data from across its products and services. Mr. Pichai, I understand that Google collects user data on users' browsing activity through its Chrome browser. Does Google use that data for its own purposes, either in advertising or to develop and refine its algorithms?
Mr. Chairman, we do use data to improve our products and services for our users. Anytime we do it, we believe in giving users choice, control, and transparency. We make it very clear, and we give them simplified settings to choose how they like their data.
And so you do use the data that you get from these companies for your purposes.
My understanding was whether we use data in general to improve our products and services, and we do use data to show ads, but we give users the choice. They can turn ads personalization on or off.
Now, this obviously, the use of this data from all these companies gives you a tremendous advantage over them and over any competitor. Does the ability to make money in any way affect Google's algorithm in terms of what news appears in a typical user's search results?
The way we rank our search results, we don't take into account a commercial relationship that we have.
Okay. But Facebook and Google have gravely threatened journalism in the United States. Reporters have been fired, local newspapers have been shut down, and now we hear that Google and Facebook are making money over what news they let the American people see. This is a very dangerous situation. And unfortunately, my time has expired and I have to yield back.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. I now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stubbe, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to pick up where I left off. Mr. Pichai, there are rioting groups that are going unchecked with the posting of what I would contend is very violent video. Yet yesterday I was sent a YouTube video about doctors discussing hydrochloroquine and discussing the not dangers of children returning to school. And when I clicked on the link, it was taken down. And then I was sent a different link on YouTube and it was taken down. I just checked again just to make sure. And it says that this video has been removed for violating YouTube's community guidelines. How can doctors giving their opinion on a drug that they think is effective for the treatment of COVID-19 and doctors who think it's appropriate for children to return back to school violate YouTube's community guidelines when all of these videos of violence is all posted on YouTube?
Congressman, we believe in freedom of expression, and there is a lot of debate on YouTube about effective ways to deal with COVID. We allow robust debate. But in the area during a pandemic, we look to local health authorities. So, for example, in the US, it would be CDC for guidelines around medical misinformation in a narrow way, which could cause harm in the real world. And so, for example, if there is aspects of a video, and if it explicitly states something could be a proven cure, and that doesn't meet CDC guidelines, it's
free expression of speech, and you have these doctors who are giving their opinion as doctors, and I don't understand why YouTube and therefore Google thinks it's appropriate to silence physicians and their opinion of what can help and cure people with COVID-19. I'm going to switch quickly to Mr. Zuckerberg. I think at this point it's fairly obvious that technology platforms have been stifling conservative news and opinions. You employ a panel of content moderators. Can you explain how Facebook chooses who these moderators are?
Thanks, Congressman. We do hire a lot of people around the world to work on safety and security. Our team is more than 30 or 35,000 people working on that now. We certainly try to do this in a way that is neutral to all viewpoints. We want to be a platform for all ideas. I don't think you build a social product with the goal of giving people a voice if you don't believe that people being able to express a wide variety of things is ultimately valuable for the world. and we try to make sure that our policies and our operations ultimately reflect and carry that out.
Is there an ideological diversity amongst the content moderators?
Congressman, I don't think we choose to hire them on the basis of an ideology. They're hired all over the world. There's certainly a bunch in the U.S. There's diversity in where they're hired, but certainly we don't want to have any bias in what we do, and we wouldn't tolerate it if we discovered that.
So you don't specifically hire, say, conservative moderators and Democrat or liberal moderators so that there's a balance in your content moderators?
Congressman, in terms of the 30 to 35,000 people or more at this point who are doing safety and security review, that is correct. In terms of the people setting the policies, I think it is valuable to have people with a diversity of viewpoints involved so we can make sure that we have the different viewpoints represented in the policy development process. And we also consult with a number of outside groups whenever we develop new policies to make sure that we're taking into account all perspectives.
What are some of those outside groups that would be conservative leaning?
Congressman, I need to get back to you with a list of specific groups, but it would depend on what the topic is.
Can you just think of one? I mean, you said you reach out to outside groups. Can you think of one conservative outside group that you reach out to and use as a content moderator?
Congressman, I'm talking about speak with people across the ideological spectrum when we're developing our policies.
I would very much appreciate a follow-up on that. Real quickly, can you briefly explain the approval process for third-party fact checkers and how many fact checkers does Facebook employ?
Of viral hoaxes, so things that are clearly false from getting a lot of distribution, but we don't ourselves want to be in the business of determining what is true and what is false. That feels like an inappropriate role for us to play. We were instituted, and I think it's called the Independent Fact-Checking Organization that has a set of guidelines partner within Facebook.
Thank you. The gentleman's time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bezos, Amazon also can be dangerous. Counterfeit medicine has said it's fixing. Amazon is $1 trillion company, but Amazon customers are not guaranteed, like it's not responsible for counterfeits being sold by owners to police Amazon's site, even though Amazon makes money when a counterfeit good is sold on its site. More than half of Amazon's sales come from third-party seller accounts. Why isn't Amazon more aggressive in ensuring that counterfeit goods are not sold on?
Thank you. This is an incredibly important issue. It does not help us earn trust with customers.